All right, so are you ready to really understand what's going on with BRICS and how it's changing everything?
Mm.
Get ready because we are going deep into this new world that's forming right in front of us.
It's really amazing what's happening right now. We're not just talking about an economic alliance anymore. BRICS, which started with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, they just added Egypt, Iran, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE.
Yeah, that's a big deal, right? It feels like a major power move. When you think about it, BRICS now has over 40% of the whole world's population and a huge part of the global economy all working together.
Exactly. And it's not just about numbers, it's about who has influence.
Hmm.
They are trying to change the whole world, and we're going to talk about how that could affect you.
Okay, so let's break this down. BRICS started as a way for these countries to have more of a voice in global finances, right? They felt like the big institutions like the IMF were controlled by Western countries.
Yeah, you're exactly right. They wanted to be part of the decision-making process, a chance to influence the rules. But now it's gone way beyond just economics. It's about creating a real alternative to the Western-led world.
So what's making all these countries want to join BRICS now? What's the appeal?
Well, for many countries, especially in what's called the Global South, it's about having a voice on the world stage, but one that's independent of Western influence. They feel ignored by the current institutions. So BRICS is a way to push back against a system they see as unfair to them.
It's like they're saying, hey, we're major players now and our voices need to be heard.
Exactly. And then you have Russia facing isolation because of the war in Ukraine. For them, BRICS is a way to show that they're not alone, that they have powerful friends.
Okay, so let's focus on these new countries that just joined BRICS, bringing in big oil producers like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and then a major geopolitical player like Iran. That has to be a game changer, right?
Oh, it's a huge shift. Think about it. BRICS is now as powerful economically as the G7, and they control a huge chunk of the world's energy resources. This isn't just a group that talks anymore. It's a real power bloc that can challenge the way things are.
Now, the question I bet a lot of people are asking is, can BRICS really create a system that replaces the US dollar? That sounds like a really ambitious goal.
It's definitely a long-term goal and a very complex one, but BRICS is taking real steps to make it happen. For example, Russia has proposed a new digital currency. Imagine a world where oil isn't priced in dollars, but in a BRICS-backed digital currency.
Well, wait a minute. Let's explain that a bit more. How would that even work?
We're still in the very early stages, but one idea is to use blockchain technology, kind of like what Bitcoin uses. The goal is to create a system where BRICS countries can do business without using the US dollar at all.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting for all of us. Think about what could happen to global trade, investments, even your own personal finances. If the dollar isn't the main currency anymore, the effects would be felt everywhere.
It's a really interesting scenario to think about, and it shows just how ambitious BRICS is. But we have to remember that even though they have shared goals, there are also tensions within the alliance.
Yeah, it's not all perfect harmony within BRICS, is it? I mean, India and China have a history of conflict. Can they really put those differences aside and work together?
That's one of the biggest challenges for BRICS. India is cautious about becoming too dependent on China, and they don't want BRICS to be controlled by any one country.
So India is trying to balance things out. They want the power that comes with a bigger BRICS, but they also don't want to be overshadowed by China. It's like they're walking a tightrope between working together and competing.
Exactly. And it's not just India. Brazil has been careful about not making the West angry. They want to stay friends with both sides, which can sometimes clash with the more assertive approach from China and Russia.
It's like they're playing a very complicated game trying to figure out what everyone else is going to do. Now, you can't talk about BRICS without talking about the big player, China. Their economy is huge, and that must affect the dynamics within the group.
Well, it definitely does. China's growing economic and military power is a factor in every discussion within BRICS. They've been careful not to seem bossy, but their influence is obvious.
So other members like India are always trying to balance things out, trying to benefit from China's economic power, but also protect their own independence.
Right, that's why this idea of strategic autonomy is so important to many BRICS members. They want to cooperate, but not if it means giving up their own freedom to make decisions.
It's a delicate balance. Now, with all these different opinions, how does BRICS actually get anything done? How do they make decisions?
Well, unlike some organizations that have a single leader, BRICS works on a consensus model. Every big decision needs all the member states to agree. There's no formal voting or hierarchy. So in theory, everyone has an equal say.
That sounds kind of idealistic. Does it actually work like that in reality? I'm guessing power dynamics still play a role.
You're right. While the goal of the consensus model is to make sure everyone's voice is heard, the reality is that some countries have more influence than others. A country's economic power and its influence on the world stage definitely affect how decisions are made.
So it's a constant back and forth trying to find that sweet spot between what each country wants and the overall goals of the group.
Exactly. And every year, the leadership of BRICS rotates to a different member. This means that each country gets to set the tone for the year, plan the big meetings, and influence what BRICS focuses on.
So it's not just a symbolic role, it's a real chance for a country to lead and push for its own interests within BRICS.
Right. And speaking of big goals, there's been a lot of talk about BRICS creating its own global currency to compete with the US dollar. Do you think that's actually possible?
It's a question a lot of people are asking, especially with tensions rising with the West. It's driven by this desire to not be so reliant on the US dollar, which some see as a tool for the West to control the world's economy.
It's about having more financial freedom, creating a system that's not as vulnerable to Western influence and sanctions.
So the idea is to create a system where they don't have to rely on the US dollar. But how would that even work? What would this new currency be based on?
That's the big question, and BRICS is still figuring it out. Some suggest connecting it to things like gold or oil. Others think it should be a digital currency backed by a combination of the currencies of the member countries.
It's a complicated problem. You need a lot of trust and stability between countries to make something like that happen.
Absolutely. Creating a new global currency isn't something you can do overnight. But the fact that they're seriously talking about it shows how committed they are to changing the current financial system.
It's like they're saying, we're not going to play by your rules anymore. We're making our own.
Exactly. And you can see this ambition in other ways, too. Take the idea for a BRICS-led grain exchange, for example.
Okay, tell me more about that. What's the purpose of that?
The idea is to create a platform where BRICS countries and other interested countries can trade grain. It's about being less reliant on markets controlled by the West and ensuring that member states have enough food.
So it's a strategic move, both economically and politically. It strengthens their relationships and could give them more power in the global food market.
Exactly. It's about building a system that can support itself and is more resilient, less affected by outside pressures.
Now let's switch gears and talk about a region that's becoming increasingly important for BRICS, Africa.
Africa is a continent with so much potential, and BRICS has been actively building relationships there. They're investing in infrastructure, offering loans, and providing an alternative to the traditional Western way of giving development aid.
And this is making the West nervous, right? They see BRICS's growing influence in Africa as a threat to their own interests.
It's definitely causing tension. But it's also important to remember that African nations are choosing to work with partners who support their goals.
Right. They're not just pawns in some global power struggle. They're making strategic decisions based on what they believe is best for their own development.
Exactly. And BRICS is offering something different. They emphasize South-South cooperation, a model based on mutual respect and not interfering in each other's affairs.
So it's less about telling them what to do and more about working together as equals.
Precisely. And that appeals to many African leaders who are tired of being told what to do by Western powers. They're looking for partners who will help them build a better and more sustainable future.
It sounds like BRICS is tapping into this desire for change in Africa, a desire to move away from those old colonial ways. But let's be honest, isn't this also about resources? Africa is full of the raw materials that the world needs to grow.
Of course. It's not just about being altruistic. BRICS countries need those resources to support their own economies. But the difference here is the approach. They're framing it as a partnership, not exploitation.
So instead of the old take the resources and run model, BRICS is focusing on investing in infrastructure and helping local communities.
Exactly. For instance, China is investing a lot of money in building roads, railways, and ports across Africa. This not only helps move goods, but also creates jobs and boosts local economies.
It's a long-term plan, building influence and securing access to resources by working together rather than forcing their way in.
That's right. And it seems to be working. Many African nations see BRICS as a more dependable and less demanding partner than Western powers.
Okay, but let's be real. No group is perfect. What are some potential problems with BRICS having more influence in Africa?
That's an important question. One worry is that the investments from BRICS might come with strings attached, leading to debt traps or giving them too much political control.
So it's important to look beyond the promises and really examine the deals being made to make sure African countries are getting a fair deal.
Absolutely. Transparency and accountability are essential. Another potential issue is that BRICS, in its pursuit of economic growth, might not always prioritize environmental sustainability or human rights.
So it's not just about who's investing, but also how they're doing it. African nations need to be smart and hold their partners to high standards.
Exactly. It's about finding the right balance between attracting investment and protecting their long-term interests.
Okay, so we've talked about how BRICS is affecting Africa, but what about the bigger picture? What does this all mean for the future of the world order?
That's the big question, isn't it? We're seeing a major shift in who holds power. The world is moving away from a system where the West is in charge to a more multipolar world with several centers of power.
It's like the ground is shifting beneath our feet in terms of global politics, and BRICS is one of the main forces causing this change.
Exactly. And this has huge implications for everything from international trade to global security.
It sounds like we're entering a whole new world, a more complex world where the old rules don't apply and the future is less predictable.
That's definitely true. But it's also a time of great opportunity. The rise of BRICS creates new possibilities for working together innovation and a more fair distribution of power.
So it's not all bad news. There's potential for good things to happen if BRICS can manage these challenges and actually do what it promises.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay informed, to keep talking about these things, and to play a part in shaping the future we want.
So to bring this back to you, our listener, the rise of BRICS isn't just some far-off event that doesn't affect you. It has the potential to change your life in big ways.
From the cost of gas to the stability of the global financial system, the decisions made by BRICS will have ripple effects around the world.
It reminds us that we're all connected, and the choices made by governments, businesses, and everyday people have consequences that reach far beyond what we see immediately around us.
So stay curious, keep asking questions, and stay informed. The world is changing quickly, and understanding what's happening is more important now than ever.
That's a great point to end on. We've talked about a lot today, from why BRICS is so attractive to the challenges it faces and its goals to change the world order.
It's a complicated and fascinating story, and it's still unfolding. Who knows what will happen next?
That's what makes it so interesting, right? The future is full of possibilities. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of BRICS. We hope you learned something and that it got you thinking.
We'll be back soon with part 2 of this deep dive into BRICS. Make sure to join us then to continue exploring this complex and evolving landscape. Until then, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep digging deeper. Welcome back. So before we jump into the Middle East and how BRICS is involved there, let's take a closer look at how these internal dynamics we were just discussing actually work in practice. You've got countries with such different histories and political systems, even different levels of economic development, and they're all trying to find common ground.
Right, it's like trying to get a group of chefs who all specialize in different cuisines to agree on one menu. There are bound to be some disagreements in the kitchen.
Haha, that's a great analogy. And to make things even more interesting, you have those long-standing tensions like the border disputes between India and China.
So how do they even begin to overcome these disagreements and work together? It can't be easy.
It requires a lot of compromise, a willingness to put those shared goals ahead of individual interests, and a shared understanding that they're stronger as a united front than they are divided. It's about realizing that a fractured BRICS doesn't benefit anyone.
Okay, so can you give us some concrete examples of these internal clashes and how they play out within the group?
Sure. Let's take the issue of BRICS expansion, for example. China and Russia were very enthusiastic about adding new members, but India was more cautious. They were concerned that expanding too quickly could dilute the focus on economic cooperation and create new challenges, especially with China's growing influence.
So for India, it's a balancing act. They want the power that comes with a bigger BRICS, but they're also wary of being overshadowed by China, kind of like walking a tightrope.
Exactly. And it's not just India. Brazil has been careful not to upset the West. They want to maintain good relationships with both sides, which can sometimes create friction with China and Russia's more assertive approach.
It's like they're playing a multidimensional game of chess, trying to anticipate everyone's moves. Now, we can't talk about BRICS without addressing the obvious. China. They're the economic giant in the room, and that must have a huge impact on the group's internal dynamics.
Absolutely. China's economic and military strength is a major factor in every discussion within BRICS. They've been careful not to appear dominant, but their influence is undeniable.
So other members like India are constantly trying to find that balance between benefiting from China's economic engine while also protecting their own interests and independence.
Precisely. That's why this concept of strategic autonomy is so crucial for many BRICS members. They want to cooperate, but not at the expense of their own decision-making power.
It's a delicate dance.
Hmm.
So with all these different viewpoints, how does BRICS actually get anything done? What's their decision-making process like?
Unlike organizations with a single leader, BRICS operates on a consensus-based model. This means that any major decision requires agreement from all member states. There's no formal voting or hierarchy. So in theory, every country has an equal voice.
That sounds pretty idealistic. Does it really work that way in practice, though? It seems like power dynamics would still come into play.
You're right. The consensus model aims to ensure that everyone's voice is heard. But in reality, the level of influence varies. A country's economic power and its geopolitical standing inevitably factor into the decision-making process.
So it's a constant negotiation trying to find that balance between what each country wants and the collective goals of the group.
Exactly. And every year, the chairmanship of BRICS rotates to a different member state. This means each chair gets to set the agenda for that year, shape the discussions at summits and meetings, and influence the direction of initiatives.
So it's not just a symbolic role. It's a real opportunity to take the lead and advance a country's interests within BRICS. Speaking of ambitious goals, there's been a lot of discussion about BRICS potentially creating a new global reserve currency to challenge the dominance of the US dollar. Is that really a feasible goal?
The idea has gained a lot of traction, especially as tensions with the West have increased. It stems from a desire to reduce dependence on the US dollar, which many view as a tool of Western economic dominance.
So it's about achieving financial independence, creating a system that's less susceptible to Western influence and sanctions. But how would such a currency even work? What would back it?
That's a million-dollar question, and it's one that BRICS is still trying to answer. Some have proposed pegging it to a basket of commodities like gold or oil. Others envision a digital currency backed by a combination of the member states' currencies.
It's a complex challenge. Building that level of trust and stability between nations to make something like that work is no small feat.
You're absolutely right. Creating a new global reserve currency isn't something that can happen overnight. But the fact that they're seriously considering it demonstrates their commitment to challenging the established financial order.
It's like they're saying, we're not going to play by your rules anymore, we're going to create our own.
Exactly. And you can see this ambition reflected in other areas, too.
Yeah.
Take the proposal for a BRICS-led grain exchange, for instance.
Okay, let's explore that further. What's the goal behind that initiative?
The idea is to establish a platform for trading grain between BRICS nations and other interested countries. It's about reducing reliance on Western-dominated markets and ensuring food security for the member states.
So it's a strategic move with both economic and political implications. It strengthens their ties and could potentially give them more leverage in the global food market.
Precisely. It's about creating a system that is more self-sufficient and resilient, less vulnerable to external pressures.
Now let's shift our focus to a region that has become increasingly important for BRICS, Africa.
Africa is a continent with enormous potential, and BRICS has been actively cultivating relationships there. They're investing in infrastructure, providing loans, and offering an alternative to the traditional Western model of development assistance.
And this is raising concerns in the West, isn't it? They see BRICS's growing influence in Africa as a direct challenge to their own interests.
It's definitely a point of contention. But it's also crucial to remember that African nations are actively choosing partners who align with their objectives.
Right. They're not just pawns in this global power struggle. They're making strategic decisions based on what they believe will best serve their own development.
Exactly. And BRICS is offering a different approach. They emphasize South-South cooperation, a model built on mutual respect and non-interference in each other's internal affairs.
So it's less about dictating terms and more about working together as equals.
Precisely. And this approach resonates with many African leaders who are tired of being told what to do by Western powers. They're seeking partners who will collaborate with them to build a more equitable and sustainable future.
It sounds like BRICS is tapping into a genuine desire for change in Africa, a move away from those old colonial patterns. But realistically, isn't this also about resources? Africa is incredibly rich in the raw materials that are essential for global growth.
Of course. It would be naive to think that resource access isn't a factor. BRICS nations need those resources to fuel their own economies. But the key distinction here lies in their approach. They're framing it as a partnership, not exploitation.
So instead of the traditional extract and export model, BRICS is emphasizing investments in infrastructure and local development.
Exactly. Think of it this way. China, for example, is investing heavily in building roads, railways, and ports across Africa. This not only facilitates the transportation of goods, but also creates jobs and stimulates local economies.
It's a long-term strategy aimed at building influence and securing access to resources through collaboration rather than coercion.
Precisely. And it's proving to be quite effective. Many African nations view BRICS as a more reliable and less demanding partner than Western powers.
Okay, but let's be realistic. No alliance is perfect. What are some of the potential drawbacks to BRICS's expanding influence in Africa?
That's a crucial question to consider. One concern is that BRICS investments might come with hidden conditions leading to debt traps or undue political influence.
So it's essential to look beyond the rhetoric and scrutinize the deals being made to make sure that African nations are getting a fair deal.
Absolutely. Transparency and accountability are paramount. Another potential issue is that BRICS, in its pursuit of economic growth, might not always prioritize environmental sustainability or human rights.
So it's not simply about who's investing, but also how they're investing. African nations need to be discerning and hold their partners accountable to high standards.
Exactly. It's about striking a balance between attracting investment and safeguarding their long-term interests.
Okay, so we've examined BRICS's impact on Africa, but what about the broader implications? What does this all mean for the future of the global order?
That's the fundamental question, isn't it? What we're witnessing is a fundamental shift in the balance of power. The world is moving away from a unipolar system dominated by the West towards a more multipolar order with multiple centers of influence.
So it's as if the tectonic plates of geopolitics are shifting, and BRICS is one of the key drivers of this transformation.
Precisely. And this shift has profound implications for everything from global trade to international security.
It seems like we're entering a new era of complexity where the old rules no longer apply and the future is more uncertain than ever.
That's certainly true. But it's also an era brimming with opportunities. The emergence of BRICS creates new avenues for collaboration, innovation, and a more equitable distribution of power.
So it's not all doom and gloom. There's a potential for positive change if BRICS can successfully navigate these challenges and fulfill its promises.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay informed, to engage in these conversations, and to be active participants in shaping the future we want to see.
Yeah, it does sound like BRICS is really tapping into something there, a real desire for a different way of doing things in Africa. But let's be honest here, isn't this also about getting access to resources? I mean, Africa has a ton of the raw materials that the world needs to grow.
Oh, absolutely. We can't ignore that BRICS countries need those resources to fuel their own economic growth. But the key difference here is how they're going about it. They're talking about partnership, not exploitation.
So are you saying that instead of that old take the resources and leave model, BRICS is putting more emphasis on things like investing in infrastructure and helping develop local economies?
Exactly. Think about it. China, for example, is investing heavily in things like building roads, railways, and ports across Africa. This not only makes it easier to transport goods, but it also creates jobs and helps boost those local economies.
It sounds like a smart long-term strategy. They're building influence and getting access to those resources by working together rather than just taking what they want.
Exactly. And it seems to be working. Many African countries see BRICS as a better partner than Western powers. They see them as more dependable and less demanding.
Okay, but we have to be realistic here. No alliance is perfect. What are some of the potential downsides to BRICS having more and more influence in Africa?
That's a really important question. One concern is that the investments coming from BRICS might have strings attached. Things that could lead to debt traps for those countries or give BRICS too much political control.
So it sounds like it's important to look beyond what they're saying and really examine the deals being made. Make sure that African countries are getting a fair deal.
Absolutely. Transparency is key, and so is accountability. Another potential issue is that in their push for economic growth, BRICS might not always prioritize things like environmental sustainability or human rights.
And it makes you think it's not just about who's investing. It's also about how they're doing it. African countries need to be careful and make sure their partners are meeting high standards.
Exactly. It's a balancing act between attracting investment and protecting their own interests in the long run.
So we've talked about BRICS and its impact on Africa, but let's zoom out a bit. What does all of this mean for the future of the global order, this whole power shift thing?
That's the big question, isn't it? What we're seeing is a huge shift in global power. The world is moving away from a system where the West is in control to a system with many centers of power.
It's like the whole world is rearranging itself in terms of who has power, and BRICS is one of the main forces behind this change.
Exactly. And this is going to have major effects on everything from how global trade works to international security.
It feels like we're moving into uncharted territory. It's more complex, the old rules don't apply, and it's harder to predict what will happen next.
That's true. But it's also a time with a lot of potential. The rise of BRICS creates new possibilities for countries to work together to come up with new ideas and for power to be distributed more fairly.
So it's not all doom and gloom. There's definitely a chance for positive change, especially if BRICS can handle these challenges and actually deliver on what it's promising.
Right. And that's why it's crucial to stay informed, to keep having these conversations and
Yeah.
to actively participate in shaping the future we want.
So bringing this back to you, our listener, the rise of BRICS isn't just some abstract thing happening on the other side of the world. This could have a real impact on your life.
Absolutely. Everything from how much you pay for gas to whether the global financial system is stable. The decisions made within BRICS are going to have ripple effects that will reach us all.
It's a good reminder that we're all connected in some way. And the choices made by governments, by businesses, by individuals, they all have consequences that go way beyond our immediate world.
So stay curious, keep asking questions, and stay informed. The world is changing fast, and it's more important than ever to understand what's happening.
That's a perfect note to wrap things up on. We've covered a lot today, from why BRICS is appealing to the challenges it faces and its goals to change the way the world works.
It's definitely a complex story and a fascinating one. And it's still unfolding. Who knows what will happen next?
That's what keeps it interesting, right? There are so many possibilities for the future. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of BRICS. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. We'll see you next time.
Until then, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep digging deeper.